to Ashling for that. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Treasa McVeigh, not a lawyer or any kind of legal expertise, but I'm going to try and give you a kind of a background to how we came to have the 8th Amendment in the Constitution and what has brought us to the point where we are today. So the first thing to realise is that there's a big difference between statute law, or the law of the land, and constitutional law. And constitutional law always trumps, if you like, the law of the land. So in actual fact, abortion has been illegal in both Britain and Ireland due to two articles in the Offences Against the Person Act of 1861. And they actually prevent abortion liable to penal servitude for life for procuring of a miscarriage. And that law has been in effect in Britain up until 1967, where those articles were repealed by the 1967 Abortion Act, and they remained in force in the island of Ireland, both north and south. And that is the situation that we were in 1983. But around 1982, some anti-abortion activists became concerned that it might be possible to overturn this law, either by some kind of a judicial ruling or just a change in the law through the Oireachtas. So they wanted to ensure that that couldn't happen by putting a ban on abortion into the Constitution of Ireland. So that's what they set about lobbying the government to do. And in 1983, the referendum was held. Now, the wording of the amendment was quite strongly debated, and there was a lot of concern that it was ambiguous. An alternative wording was suggested and then rejected, and they went back to the original wording, which was what the country voted on in 1983. And this referendum passed after a very bitter campaign in 1983 with a vote of about 2-1, with 53% of the population voting. And so that is how we ended up in 1983 with the wording of Article 40.3.3, or also known as the 8th Amendment. And just in case you don't know what that wording says, it says, "The state acknowledges the right to life of the unborn and, with due regard to the equal right to life of the mother, guarantees in its laws to respect and, as far as practicable, by its laws to defend and vindicate that right." So you can see that this has immediately put the right to life of the mother in conflict with the right to life of the fetus that she carries. As I said, the Constitution is the highest law in the land, so all law must flow from that and not be in conflict with it in any way. And it's the Supreme Court that judges on constitutional law and how it should be interpreted. So it all went kind of quiet for between 1983 and 1992. And just to say that the 1861 Act remains in force, and that the number of women giving Irish addresses in UK abortion clinics rises somewhat from 3,603 in 1981 to 4,154 in 1991. So obviously the 8th Amendment is not preventing Irish abortion happening in the UK in any way. And in 1992, we have the X case, which many of you will remember. And in this case, the parents of a 14-year-old girl who is suicidal, pregnant, raped by a neighbour, wishes to bring her to the United Kingdom to have an abortion. And they contact the Gardaí beforehand to ask if the material from the fetus can be used in the prosecution case to identify the father, or the rapist, as more properly it should be known. And what happened was that they informed the Gardaí, and the Gardaí passed it up along the line until the Attorney General was informed of the case, and he felt that because of the right to life of the unborn in the Constitution, he had no option other than to put an injunction on this girl from travelling to the UK, to keep her in the country for the 9 months so that an abortion could not take place. And this created uproar on the island of Ireland. As you can imagine, there were thousands of people out demonstrating in the streets. But the High Court upheld that injunction, but then the parents brought an appeal to the Supreme Court, which, as I said, is the supreme body for deciding on constitutional law. So the Supreme Court overturned the High Court judgment, and they ruled that because there was a real and substantial risk to the life of the young girl, that she should have the right to have a termination. And that case is what sets up, if you like, for future law, but it's not acted upon for a very long time. So I should say that in November 1992 we got some extra legislation attached to Article 43.3, which confirms our right to travel to another state and confirms our right to information. And it's also overturned at the same time is an attempt to make the risk of suicide a non-reason to qualify for an abortion. So nothing again happens for a very long time, for 10 years, and in 2002 the government attempts to legislate again for the X case, and they want to bring in under constitutional protection a bill which again would exclude the risk of suicide as being a valid reason for having an abortion, would bring in a 12-year sentence for anyone having an abortion that's not judged legal, and that is defeated by the narrowest of margins. I mean, the yes vote for that was 49.56%. And so it all goes quiet again for a very long time. I think the government has given up. So in 2010, then the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Ireland failed in its duties to legislate at all on abortion and on the X case. And this is because a person with a life-threatening pregnancy, we failed in providing clear and legal information to her as to when she is allowed to have an abortion under Irish law. So the government then begins working on what eventually becomes the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act of 2013, which comes into effect on the 1st of January 2014. And that, again, it restricts abortion as legal only if doctors judge that there is a real and substantial risk to the life of the mother, and it carries a 14-year, up to a 14-year jail sentence if those conditions are not met. And we must remember that in the meantime, Savita Halappanavar has died in a Galway hospital after an inevitable miscarriage. So that it was Savita's death that really pushed the Repeal the 8th movement, and the government set up the Citizens' Assembly, as you'll remember, which met between November 2016 and April 2017, and then we had the Joint Oireachtas Committee, which met between September and December of last year, which heard lots of testimonies, lots of legal evidence, lots of medical evidence, and they are both in agreement that the 8th Amendment should not remain in the Constitution in full. So this means we get our referendum, and they make various recommendations in their reports as to when they feel that abortion should be legal. I'm not really going to go into all of them at the moment because I might run out of time. But I just say that we have a referendum now on Friday the 25th of May, 3 weeks from now, and that will be the 36th Amendment on the Constitution Bill 2018. And I would then refer you to the website refcom.ie, which puts out, it's a very downloadable booklet which tells you exactly what you'll be asked about. It looks like this, only bigger. And it tells you essentially what the outcomes of a yes or a no vote will be. So as it says, a no vote will leave Article 40.33 unchanged. Laws may be passed to provide for the termination of pregnancy only where there is a real and substantial risk to the life of the mother, including the risk of suicide. And what will a yes vote allow? Well, it would allow the Oireachtas to pass laws regulating the termination of pregnancy, which may not be limited to just a real and substantial risk to the life of the mother. And the current law, it's important to realise, is the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act 2013 will remain in place until that law is changed or challenged in the courts as unconstitutional. So I would then also recommend you to what I think is an amazing website called About the 8th with the 8, figure 8 .com, which is set up by two pro-choice lawyers, Fiona Delondres and Mairead Enright, but it gives very, very completely factual, unbiased information about what's proposed, what might happen, what would happen if the new law is put in place. So I will say that in relation to the 8th Amendment, if it's repealed, the government will try and introduce a bill, which they have given us the heads of bill for. And in very brief terms, the proposal is that abortion will be available on request up to 12 weeks of pregnancy, subject to a 3-day waiting period. And then in cases of up to the viability of the fetus, where two doctors certify that there's a risk to the life of the pregnant woman, or if there is a risk of serious harm to the health of the pregnant woman. Where there are two doctors certify that there has been a diagnosis of fatal fetal anomaly when needed in an emergency. So that's just a very brief outline of it. We will also decriminalise abortion for a woman procuring an abortion for herself, but it will still be a crime for someone to carry out an abortion outside of the grounds of that law. Now, we'll just say one thing, which is there's no guarantee that this law will pass. It has to be debated in the Dáil and passed through Senate. I would also say we have a government that took 20 years, or more than 20 years, to legislate on the X case. A very conservative government. And one last point is that Malta has a written constitution. It does not ban abortion in that constitution, although they tried. It bans it within the law of the land, and I would just say the maximum sentence there for procuring an abortion is 3 to 4 years. They have a very different balance because they don't give the unborn the same right to life as the mother. So even though they consider it a crime, it doesn't carry anything like the 14-year sentence that is currently in place. So essentially, if we want to see any change in the law, at present it is not possible to pass a law to allow termination in the cases of inevitable miscarriage, in the case of rape, in the case of a child pregnant through incest. Any of these cases, we have got to take the 8th Amendment out of the Constitution and legislate for it, abortion in the law of the land.